here, as your commentator, is Stephen Grenfell.
Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, both you in the studio and those listening. Now, tonight we present the first of a series of 3 broadcasts by that very much discussed pair, the Piddingtons. The last broadcast in their first series of this particular form of entertainment left, as you know, Britain arguing fiercely. Well, over the next 3 weeks, here is your opportunity to decide for you yourselves. Right now, however, let's hear from Sydney Piddington. You can't at the moment hear from his wife, Leslie Pope, or Leslie Piddington, of course, as she is, because Leslie's 12 miles away trying on a diving suit. But here's Sydney.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Well, as Stephen Grenfell has just told you, life's been quite exciting for us since we left you a few months ago. We've had a lot more letters, some pleasant ones and some rather rude. Anyhow, tonight we plan to answer at least some of the criticisms that have been offered. That's why Leslie isn't here. As Stephen Grenfell has said, she's 12 miles away at Surbiton trying on a diving suit. That's not as silly as it sounds. One of the most violently abusive letters we received said if we could transfer thoughts, why didn't we put Leslie in a trunk, lower it gently into a pond, and let her receive from there? It seemed an excellent idea to me, so I decided that next time we broadcast, that's what we'd do. Well, I'm sorry to say, Leslie decided that was not what we'd do. She put forward lots of reasons, and the best that we could do was to persuade her to attempt an experiment while submerged in a diving bell at the bottom of a test tank at Surbiton. Now, Gilbert Harding's out there with her, and so we'll cross over to Surbiton, and they can tell you all about it for themselves.
Well, hello everyone, and good evening from Surbiton. Leslie and I are standing by the edge of a deep tank filled with water. It all looks very scientific and it's very well lit up, and round us there are diving helmets and boots and rubber suits and pipelines and all kinds of underwater paraphernalia. And on the edge of the tank, suspended above it, there's a diving bell, a steel diving bell. It weighs 6.5 hundredweight, I see. And Leslie's going to get into it, and then she and a trained and experienced diver here, Mr. Stanley Mearns, I beg his pardon, Mr. Stanley Mearns, will be lowered to the bottom of the tank. And from there, Leslie is to try to receive the message transmitted by Sydney from your studio there in London in the west end of 12 miles away. How do you feel about it, Leslie, all right?
Not very happy, really. It looks a bit wet.
Well, it is wet. Do you think you're going to get what your husband's sending?
Right now, all I think I'll get's a cold.
Oh, no, I think you'll be all right. The water's nice and warm. Look at Mr. Mearns there, the diver. He's not worried, are you, Mr. Mearns?
What, worried of going down in a diving bell with Mrs. Piddington? I should think not.
Thank you, Mr. Mearns. Now, I don't want to complain, but are you quite sure these trousers won't leak?
Well, I don't think they will leak, but while they're having a final check-up about the diving suit, let's just cross back to the studio in London.
Right you are, Mrs. Piddington.
Not yet. You want me to go to the studio first?
Stanley Mearns coming in a bit on cue there. Leslie, you didn't sound terribly happy, but I hope the diving suit fits and doesn't leak. Stanley Mearns, by the way, he's going to represent you listeners of the test tank, and to represent you here in the studio, we're very fortunate tonight to have with us someone who's just rushed across from Hammersmith, where she's been making a film, She Shall Have Murder, Miss Rosamund John. Miss John, would you just sit down in one of the judges' chairs? She looks far too attractive to be a judge, and I can't say that about the next one, who's a well-known South African playwright and author, a very dour, uncompromising character, a fellow South African, Noel Langley. Noel joins Miss John in the judge's chair. He's known not as a judge so much, but as a chap who wrote books like Cage Me a Peacock. Sydney, your move. Off you go.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And now, down to work. Since football seems to be the topic of the day here, I thought that with your help in the studio, we'd try a simple test in mass concentration while Leslie finds a diving suit that fits. Now, on the board here, we've had written up the names of 6 teams in the league soccer just at this moment. They are teams from the various leagues, and they were suggested for us by W. Barrington Dolby. Now, these teams are Chelsea, Watford, Portsmouth, Hull City, Tottenham Hotspurs and Swansea. Now, I'm going to ask in this test Mr. Noel Langley first and then Miss John to come forward and from these teams to pick two matches that they would like to see played if, of course, these teams could meet. And then to indicate whether the first team mentioned is going to win, lose or draw. Is that quite clear, Mr. Langley? Now, would you, Miss John, Mr. Langley, listeners, nodded his head. That's why he's called doer. Now, Miss John, would you come over to this microphone here on the far side of the platform and blindfold me with this handkerchief?
Here we go.
Right. Miss John gets hold of a very clean handkerchief. One of the stock props here. She's binding Sydney very tightly.
Oh,
got her
right.
knee.
Yes, 2 knots. I can just think, yes.
Well, he might be able to see out of the bottom of this, but we're going to turn him round away from the board. He's about 12 feet from the board. If he can see at all, he's going to be seeing out the back of his head. So that Sydney is in
Right.
fact holding Miss John's hand here at one microphone at one end of the stage. Noel Langley with a piece of chalk, rather languidly standing 12 feet away at the board with the teams on.
Now, Mr. Langley, I want you to make your first choice. That is, I want you to choose your first team, and I want you to put a tick against that so the studio audience can see it. Would you do that, please?
Right.
Now, I want you all in the studio to concentrate on that team, and I want you to just fix that team in your mind. More intently, please, would you? Still more intently. Portsmouth?
Was it Portsmouth, Noel?
Yes.
Now would you choose Portsmouth's opponents and put a cross against them?
Right.
Now will you all concentrate again on the opponents for Portsmouth? More intently, please. Tottenham Hotspurs?
No, what about it?
Now I want you to decide whether Portsmouth is going to win, lose or draw in that imaginary match.
And by the way, listeners, on the right hand of this board, win, lose and draw is written up, so it'll be a question, Noel, if you're putting a tick against one of these three words for that particular match.
Right.
Now, would you all concentrate on the result of that match, Portsmouth versus Tottenham Hotspurs? I think it's a draw, is that right?
Quite right.
Now, I don't like to let Miss John go because she's been very kindly holding my hand here at this microphone, but I'm afraid it says in the script, Miss John, that you must now go to the board and choose your first team. Would you do that? Thank you very much.
While Miss John comes over here, I'll just tell you that the three ticks that Noel Langley put up here have been rubbed out, and I want to tell you from Sydney that Miss John can pick either the same teams or other teams. It doesn't matter at all. So
Now, Miss John, would you make your first choice on the board?
It's done, Sydney.
And now, again, would you all concentrate just on that team? Just forget the other teams, just on that one. Chelsea, I think. And now, Miss John, would you choose Chelsea's opponents and mark them with a tick? And now, would you all concentrate again on the team that Miss John has ticked. Swansea. And now, Miss John, would you decide in this imaginary match that you have just set, Chelsea versus Swansea, whether, as far as Chelsea is concerned, it's going to be win, lose, or draw? Chelsea wins, I think. No, I'm sorry. What was it? A lose. Oh, never mind. Make it up.
Well, very nice going indeed, Sydney, and certainly one up to you. What about seeing how our aquatic friends are getting on over at Surbiton? Are you there, Leslie and Gilbert Harding?
Yes, we're here and all fitted up. Leslie is just preparing to enter the diving bell, and then we're going well and truly to submerge her in 12 feet of water. And when she's at the bottom of the tank, she's then going to attempt to receive a line of print taken from a book in the studio. A line that she has never seen before, from a book that she's never seen before. Are you ready, ma'am?
Yes, I'm quite ready.
Very well, then. Mr. Mearns, will you take charge, please?
Right you are, Mrs. Piddington. Will you go down the iron ladder, please? And when you're getting in the bell, don't bump your head on the top.
That's exactly what she's done, and she hasn't bumped her head, I'm glad to say. Followed by Mr. Mearns here. And in the tank they both are. I think we'll hear Mr. Mearns give orders to Surface. You'll hear him called Diver now, and he will talk to the gentleman on my right as Surface, and he'll have himself lowered. Are you ready, Mr. Mearns?
Hello, Surface. Will you turn the air on, please?
Hello, Diver. Air pressure on. Over.
Righto, Surface. Stand by to lower.
Now, this tank is now being lowered into the water. This diving bell is being lowered into the tank. It's sort of hollow diving bell, the same as if you put a glass of water into a bowl of water, some air will stay in it. Air will stay in this diving bell, and it will be maintained by pressure by air fed from the surface. We are all, I'm told, subject to about 14.7 pounds per square inch, and that will be increased by about 5 pounds when they reach the bottom of the tank. They're not at the bottom yet. How are you getting on down there?
All right. Well, my ears are going very peculiar. It's worse than an aeroplane, isn't it?
Yes, hold on a winch, please, Surface. Well, Leslie, if your ears are hurting, the thing to do is to swallow very hard, or try holding your nose with your finger and thumb and blowing hard with your mouth closed.
Oh, right. I've got a hanky here somewhere. I think I'll blow my nose.
You can hear, listeners, you can hear the air escaping from the diving bell here in the tank. You hear it bubbling up. Both Leslie and Mr. Mearns, I need hardly tell you, are above the water, although in fact they are beneath it and surrounded by it. The bell is not out of sight, and it's not yet fully submerged. Are you going right down, Mr. Mearns?
Yes, Mr. Harding, we're ready to go down now. Stand by, Surface, to lower. Don't forget, with your ears hurt, to swallow very hard.
No, I'm swallowing all the time. It's nice and warm, isn't it?
Yes, it's nice and warm down here. It's not like being outside diving, you know.
No, it's almost as good as being on Bondi Beach. Have you ever been there?
I'm afraid I've never been, although it sounds very enticing.
Well, this is the next best thing.
Well, there you are on the bottom, aren't you, Mr. Mearns?
Yes, we're right on the bottom.
And any comments at all?
You have any comments? My legs are awfully funny. That's all the comment I've got.
Well, now they are absolutely out of sight because the tank is deep enough, and anyhow the air escaping makes it quite impossible to see the tank. And thank you, Mr. Burns. It will be your job down there, first of all, to look after Leslie, and also to make certain and to state for the benefit of our listeners that Leslie has no possible communication whatsoever with anyone outside. I'll ask you about that in a minute or later on. In the meantime, let's go back to the studio and find Stephen Grenfell. Are you there?
Yes, Gilbert, certainly. And listeners, it's important for something that you'll see later in this program that we have the unpleasant pleasure here of cutting off Gilbert Harding and those with him at Surbiton. So, BBC engineers, will you please cut all contact with Surbiton? Well, I can assure you now that we have absolutely no contact whatsoever with Surbiton. You'll see why as we go into the next test. And so, Sydney, your move.
Thank you, Stephen. Now, Mr. Lange, have you a package which was given to you by the BBC containing a book to be used in this test?
I have, yes.
Do you know what that book is?
I haven't the slightest idea at all.
As far as you know, does anybody in this studio know?
As far as I know, nobody in the studio knows. It's very well sealed.
Thank you very much. Now, will you break that package open and tell our listening audience what the book is?
Noel gets hold of a rather lethal-looking razor blade and a clasp here and starts to pack a book which looks a very large one. It's heavily sealed, got some very thick white string in it. He's making a rather long job of this. He's a man who writes books, not opens them.
I treat them with respect.
Well, you're certainly treating that one with a certain amount of respect. So, still tearing it open, as you can probably hear.
Well, now you fussed me.
And it's that kind of Christmas parcel with a lot of stuff on the outside. Now, Noel, as an author, would you mind reading the name of the book?
Yes, it's The Life of Disraeli by Moneypenny and Buckle, Volume 1, 1804 to 1859.
Okay. And as a mathematician, will you tell us how many pages it's got?
Yes. $1,668.
Now, Sydney, a lot of pages.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Langley, I want you to sit down at the chair over there, and while I go down into the audience and collect some figures which will be initialed by the persons providing them, will you just look through that book, make sure as far as you can on the time that all the pages are different and it's a perfectly normal book. Just while you're doing that, I'll go down to the audience and collect these figures.
Right, well, while Sydney Piddington gets hold of a hand mic to go down to the audience here, Noel Langley begins to read The Life of Disraeli for the first time in his life. He's starting, as so many people who write books do, at the back. But he wants to hear what happened at the end, no doubt. Well, there's Sydney. Now, I must tell you about this. Sydney has in his hand a pad of ordinary paper. He's going around the audience and asking people who have come here by BBC invitation, not for this particular purpose, just to write down any figure. And there are about 300 people watching to see that he doesn't slip another pad out of his pocket. Right, one figure's written down. He goes round to get another figure written behind it or underneath it in a sum on the same page. And so far, everybody he's met can write. That's two. He's being followed by somebody with a hand microphone because sooner or later he will want these people who are writing down numbers in a sum form, which they're all initialing, this can be inspected later, to ask somebody to add them up. Noel Langley is still reading The Life of Disraeli. So far we have...
Just so we can check it in case we have to afterwards.
He's put it down. He knows The Life of Disraeli. 4 or 5 figures on the paper, still hasn't been transferred.
Another single figure under there in the form of a sum, and then put your initials beside it so it can be checked in case we have to check it afterwards.
You heard that. They're being initialed now and added up.
I want you to write a single figure under there in the form of a sum, and then put your initials beside it here, so it can be checked in case we have to check it afterwards. Now, sir, you have a list of figures there provided by the audience, one of which you've supplied and you've signed for yourself. I want you to draw a line under those figures and add them up.
And while the sum of addition is being done, you can well imagine that if anybody had seen Sydney Piddington take another book out of his hand or do any fast work or any fast moving, there'd been a cry of protest. Well, the mathematician in the audience is adding up. Carry one.
He's a bit slow.
Carry 6. Anyway, there's the...
And then just put your initials beside that total so it can be checked if we have to check it afterwards. Right? Thank you very much. And now, would you, madam, Mr. Langley told us that the book that's been chosen by the BBC has over 1,600 pages in it. I want to explain that total you have there is going to be used finally to indicate a page in this book. So you can leave the total the way it is, or you can put it in the 100 class by adding either 100 or any 100 up to 1,600. Would you please do that? And then just put your initials to that so we can check it if we have to afterwards. Right? Thank you very much. I'll just go back to the platform now.
Well, here comes Sydney back with a piece of paper which has been so heavily initialed it looked like a document from Congress, which he gives to Miss John.
Now, Miss John, you have there a list of figures which has been supplied by our studio audience, one figure of which you provided yourself and which you signed.
That's right.
For. Now, are you satisfied that all those figures are the ones provided by our audience here?
Yes, quite satisfied.
And Mr. Langley, are you satisfied that the volume that you looked through is a perfectly ordinary one?
Completely satisfied, yes.
Completely satisfied, right. Now, Miss Johns, I want you to take the book from Mr. Langley and bring it over here to this microphone. Now, I want you to turn up the page in the book indicated by the total of that sum. Let me know...
Do I announce the total?
Well, yes, you can, because it can't be heard at all at Surbiton.
The total is 735.
Now, let me know
Here we are.
As soon as you've found the
Yes,
page.
I found it.
And I want you to find a line on that page by taking the last figure in your total, count down that number of lines, and then, when you've found it, write that line on the board. There's a pencil, you can mark it if you like.
Yes.
Then would you take the chalk and write up that line on the board here, if you'd print it so our studio audience can all read it.
Oh, Miss John has found this particular line in the life of Disraeli. She's beginning to write it in very workmanlike script on the board. And you listeners, if you're interested in this, I'm going to read the line in a minute. It's a rather squeaky line at the moment, squeaky piece of chalk. Just get out your bits of paper and pencil, will you? So that you can write it down too and confirm it when I read it later. By the way, I'll just tell you, as Miss John is writing this particular line, that we have still no contact with Surbiton. I want to confirm that. Absolutely no contact whatsoever. They are still in a diving tank and can't hear anything we're saying. And the line's still coming up now, still with a bit of a squeak. It's one of those lines that runs across the board and starts again, so it's really two lines. And the studio audience here is sitting like a lot of children in school, obsessed on the board, as they certainly never were when they were at school, I'm sure of that. Have you got a long way to go yet?
That's a lot.
There's the lot. Now, for those of you at home with pencils and paper, I'll give you the line, reading out of the back of one eye. Waited a day after Stanley's ultimatum, and then told. Waited a day after Stanley's ultimatum, and then told. Right, that's the line, and now, Sydney, will you take over?
Now, Mr. Langley, I want you to ask Gilbert Harding, that's our commentator at Surbiton, to ask Mr. Means, the diver, who is at the bottom of the test tank with my wife, those questions you were handed when you first came into the studio this evening. Perhaps, first of all, you would tell our listeners about them.
I shall have to read them again myself.
Right.
Yes, I was asked by Mr. Ian Messiter to ask these two questions. The first one is, do you know which book has been chosen for this test? The second is, has any title or quotation from any book been mentioned in your presence in this studio?
That's Mr. Means. It's from this studio, isn't it?
Yes,
from this
Mr.
studio.
Messiter gave these to me
Right.
to ask.
Now, when you ask those questions, I want you to ask them in any order, and this is most important, ask them in your own words, so there can be no code or clue in those questions. Now, BBC engineers, can we cross over now to Surbiton? Gilbert Harding, are you there?
Yes, I've been summoned again by a red light. We've been standing around here rather impatiently wondering what's going on, but here I am again, yes?
Well, Mr. Langley, would you please ask your questions straight away? And as soon as Gilbert Harding has asked those questions of Mr. Mearns and Mr. Mearns has answered, I would ask you all at home and in the studio here to concentrate on the line that's been chosen, and I shall attempt to transmit it to Leslie. Would you ask your questions now, Mr. Langley?
Yes. The first one is, do you know which book has been chosen for this test?
Let's have one at a time, shall we? All right, no, that's the first one, right? And the second one?
Has any title or quotation from any book been mentioned to you in your presence in the studio?
Mr. Mearns, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Harding.
I have two questions to put to you from Mr. Noel Langley, far away in the BBC studio. Here they are. Do you know what book is being used in this test?
No, I don't know which book is being used.
Have you seen or heard of any line of typing or quotation from the studio?
No, the whole time that Mrs. Piddington has been here, there's been no communication regarding any lines or typing at all. Over.
Those are Mr. Mearns' categorical negatives from under the water. I can confirm them, so there we are.
Thank you. Well, it's very strange down here. I do hope I shall be successful. I think my husband's already asked you all to concentrate on the line. And I do ask for your help, too. Would you all now just concentrate on the line that's been chosen? A man standing. Waiting. Something about time. A long time. All day. Waiting all day. A man's name. Stanley. For Stanley. Paper. Piece of paper. A demand. Something. Order. Final. Ultimatum. Stanley's ultimatum. Wait. And afterwards. And then. Said. I think that's all. I think the whole line is waiting all day for Stanley's ultimatum and then said.
Leslie, very many congratulations here from all of us. That was a swell job. And I hope that with Mr. Mearns and Gilbert Harding, you don't get a cold and come up safely in your diving bell. There you are, listeners, a line chosen from a book provided by the BBC, a line the Piddingtons had never seen, a line from a book chosen by a studio audience here by mathematics, a line transmitted in complete silence without communication at any time between them this evening from Sydney Piddington here in the BBC London studio in the West End to his wife Leslie, 12 miles away in Surbiton, 12 feet underwater and under surveillance. Now, what have you got to say about that, Sidney?
Well, what I would like to say is that the book was provided by the BBC, the figures were provided by our studio audience here, and I have not spoken a word to Leslie since 2 o'clock today. Beyond that, well, you are the judge.
Thank you. So concludes the first in this new series of 3 broadcasts at this time each Monday by the Piddingtons. Our thanks to Miss Rosamond John, to Noel Langley, to Stanley Mearns, Leslie's escort at Surbiton for their assistance, cooperation, and of course to Gilbert Harding, who, like myself throughout, was on dry land.
You've been listening to a program featuring the Piddingtons. Your commentators were Stephen Grenfell and Gilbert Harding. Production by Ian C. Messiter.